Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Stat Check Extra. We are here to run through the balanced data slate, the one we've all been waiting for, the reason I've lost income for the past 2 weeks. Seriously, if it wasn't out today, I was going to be filing for missed earnings with GW in court. No, it's good to have it. It's good to see it. It's the last big update of 10th edition. I don't think we're expecting anything new now. We've got the Lion rules. We've got Dante's new rules. If they drop any more rules for 10th edition, I would be very surprised.
I think we're done now.
A very, maybe a model or two that come out in, box releases. So this should be the final meta of the edition, which means we've got a couple months of playing this game in the last stand. I'm very much looking forward to it. I've got a few events coming up with this, Warhammer Festival 1, and I think it's going to be a great time. The game certainly looks like it's going to be a little more balanced, a lot more interesting. Some of the best armies took a big hit here. Some of the bottom ones got a buff up, but we're here to run down what the changes were, why they matter for those armies, what didn't change here, and what we think the meta is going to look like afterwards. I'm Innes. I'm joined by Cliff and Jeremy. We have a pastebin document, as you can see to the side here, lovingly compiled by Jeremy, with all of the changes that we could identify, and we're going to be running through them with you now.
Oh, I wish I could take credit for compiling this. This comes from Reddit, so thank you very much.
Oh, okay. I just assumed that Jeremy had done it, but Jeremy outsourced, which is very smart. So, let's start. Balanced data slate. First big change was Aboard the Witch moving from Warpcraft, which is the psychic powers category with Warp Ritual and Psychic Interrogation, to Purge the Enemy, which is the one that has things like Assassinate and Bring It Down on it. It's not a super big change. It means that you're not doubling down on things like Assassinate and Abhor into armies like Grey Knights and Thousand Suns. Broadly, where it always should have been, as far as I'm concerned. Any major thoughts on this one, guys?
Seems about right. We'll talk later, but it's the only change the Thousand Suns got. So,
and it's helpful. It doesn't, it's not bad. It would be more helpful for Thousand Suns if it was in the no prisoners category, I think. But
yeah.
Do you think, is it not helpful because typically at end around top tables, folks were not trying to double down on this anyway, since you probably weren't going to get away with Assassinate in the first place?
It was not even that you wouldn't necessarily double down on it, but if you lost all your characters and gave up a 15 on Assassinate and a 15 on Abhor, you were losing anyway, right? You weren't coming back from that. Maybe it changed 1 in 10 games with this army, but nobody was when people were playing the Tzeentch list with Thousand Sons of Flamers at LVO, you weren't taking Abhor and Assassinate into it. It was suicide. You were just they were gonna sit in the corner and score points at you while you never got to their characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Anthony in our Discord mentioned it perfectly. Unless you were him or Harpster, you never took Assassinate into that combo.
Yeah, it was just not worth it. It was unless you were playing super, Nits could get away with it. But Nits would take Cranial Feasting because you'd get the Sergeants instead.
Sure.
It never mattered. The only one that I suppose this will matter for is if you've got a really good Purge the Enemy secondary that you're picking anyway, as opposed to Assassinate. So something like Genestealer Cults with Ambush. This maybe helps out a bit in a few specific matchups. Space Marines with Codex Warfare, if Codex Warfare hadn't changed as we're about to get to, would be another example of something that this might have punished or made a little weaker. I'm so confused.
We just lost a Cliff.
We lost a Cliff, but I'm also what's going on in
No, I didn't lose me. I'm still here.
What happened to Innes' other hand? I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. The name. God, fuck's sake. Right. We also saw Codex Warfare capped at 5 victory points per doctrine, as it was in the previous version, and as it never should have not been.
So, not as it was before, because before it was capped at 5 for Dev, and there was no cap on Assault and Tactical. So this is actually worse than the original incarnation.
Was there? I thought there was a cap on both of the previous ones.
Nope. You only ever scored 1 point on the other one, so no one ever took it. But Dev was
terrible.
2, capped at 5.
They still only score 1. They still only score 1 each. It's still awful.
Yep.
I don't understand what this secondary does now. It's unplayable. It sure does mean that Space Marines don't have an alt 15 anymore, which is a good thing. Let's step back a little. It's really good that this secondary isn't busted. We'll talk about later when we talk about Space Marines how much this will actually change for them, but I think you're probably still going to see plenty of Space Wolves and Iron Hands out there. They're still very, very good. Deathwatch can score this. So there are definitely still armies that can score this version of the secondary. Space Wolves have a decent job of it. If you move out of Devastator Doctrine and move into Assault Doctrine at some point, you can get it with your Melta Guns, and you're probably going to get 11 to 13 on it. But that means you're having to move out of Devastator Doctrine to score it. Otherwise, you're maybe hitting 10, which is fine. It's okay as a secondary, but it's not. I don't think this is a very impressive secondary. We lost Cliff again.
He'll be back eventually.
He'll be back eventually. We're not editing this, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cliff, Deathwatch now have their Call Order secondary, which is the battlefield, which is the kill secondary, where they pick 3 battlefield roles, and which have 1 or more models in it from your opponent's army. And for each of those battlefield roles you fully kill, you get 5 EP. Now, if you kill at least 1 unit of it, you get 3.
Yeah. And I think also the way that this is worded now is it no longer scores if they don't have any of that battlefield role.
I don't think it scored any either, because like you always had to destroy the units. I don't know. I think the wording on it required you to pick a battlefield role that they had units in.
Yeah, possibly. Either way,
I think
it's a good
the
change.
previous version. Yeah, it required you to pick a unit and pick a battlefield role that the enemy unit had army models of, because there was a rider on it that said if they didn't have battlefield roles, you picked as many as they had.
That's right.
So yeah, it's like it's still not doing anything to Chaos Knights, for example.
Yeah.
Because you're just picking Lord of War. This secondary it's a nice change. It means that it's a fairly reliable 9 now, because if you don't kill 3 units over the course of the game, something's gone very wrong. And there are definitely armies where getting a 13 on this is entirely reasonable. There are a lot of units that are a lot of armies that have like 2 of a battlefield role. So think something like to use the example that's fairly relevant right now, Iron Hands that run 3 fast attacks. It's entirely reasonable that if you kill those 3 land speeders and take 5 points for it, you're going to be pretty happy with that. Especially with the Codex Warfare change, with this being in the same category, it's now a lot more reasonable to pick this. We have 50 people watching this. This is insane. It's 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. It's 3 p.m. on a Thursday, guys.
You guys just covered the Deathwatch change?
Yeah, we're just talking through Call Order now.
Yeah,
what are your implications? What are your thoughts as a Deathwatch player?
A Deathwatch player. My last game, I just got stomped out by Dark Angels. I think it's like a nice 9 to 11 baseline guaranteed, which is like relatively high as secondaries go. Yeah, I think it's really good, but I'm not sure that's enough to like throw Deathwatch suddenly from a literally absolute bottom of the competitive meta into anything worth like really considering.
Well, there are other changes for Deathwatch, right, that we'll get to. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think this is a good change. It's definitely a more interesting version of the secondary, especially with Codex Warfare going away, that this slots quite nicely into that space for Deathwatch.
Do you think the change to well, we'll get into it later when we get
we'll get to Deathwatch when we get to Deathwatch. The last secondary change we have is Brood Swarm losing the first and last bullet points. For anybody who is not aware, that is the point that says you score 1 for if you have more models on the battlefield than your opponent, and for if you meet all of the above criteria. Now, notably, the top bit of that still says score 1 VP for each of those criteria to a maximum of 5, while only having 3 criteria, which is quite funny. But yeah, so this now caps at 15. It's a significantly worse secondary now. One of the benefits of Brood Swarm, the reason that Genestealer Cult players typically took it, despite the fact that behind enemy lines is absolutely insane in the current version of Arcs of Omen, with giving you the CP if you have troops in your opponent's deployment zone, scoring, is that it's safe, right? You can very comfortably sit in your deployment zone and in neutral, pushing a couple of units over the line and bank 3 a turn on it, which is not a very healthy gameplay pattern. It's very strong. And then on the turns where you commit your opponent's deployment zone, you're getting 5s. So very reasonably, you could expect to do a 3 on turn 1, and then a 5 on turn 3 and on turns 2 and 3, and then get tabled and score 15 on this. And it did not matter.
Whereas now you actually have to be alive to the end of the game, and even then, like this is probably closer to like a 10 most games.
This is like a 10 to 11 secondary now. What that means is Genestealer Cult players are not going to take this. You're going to take behind enemy lines because the secondary is insane, and it's why I don't think nerfing Brood Swarm was the right approach for Genestealer Cults personally, because all it does is change the gameplay. It doesn't actually nerf it really.
Yeah, now they're going to take 5-man Acolyte units and get CP for scoring behind enemy lines.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to put Genestealer Cults will now have to put a little more effort in. They'll give up a few more things on like kill secondaries. So if you have like the kill a unit a turn, so for like giving up grind and stuff like that, them is going to be a little better. But they already give up no prisoners like a mother trucker, so who cares? I don't think this was the right way to approach Genestealer Cults. I think Genestealer Cults made out like bandits this Dataslate and will be very, very strong going forwards. Because this is the only the spoilers. This is the only change we saw for Genestealer Cults, and I don't think it matters. I think it just means you'll change 100 points of your list, put in 2 squads of acolytes to guarantee 2 more 3s on this, and you'll be fine. And you'll go 3-4-4-4 on this in games you win, and it'll be fine. All right, let's get on to some faction-specific changes as Jeremy edits the document in front of us to make sure we all doubt what we're looking at. So, Custodes, we now have a restriction on using it's Arcane Genetic Alchemy, which is the Transhuman, and Emperor's Aspect, which is the no reroll stratagem.
Correct.
You can't use both stratagems on the same unit in the same phase. So, no, you can't now do Transhuman and no rerolls on a squad of Custodes. This is huge. It drastically reduces the survivability of any infantry squad in the Custodes army, most specifically the 10 Warden bricks. Just die so fast without these buffs up. In a game that's been building to kill 10 Deathwing Terminators, or up to 47 Deathwing Terminators, not having the ability to make your unit resilient as Custodes, which we're working with a worse armor save, means this squad just dies now. I think the Solar Watch build still has merit and still has play, but it's significantly lowered by these changes.
Yeah, no, I think it's good because it means you don't just slam 4 CP on a unit and say, no, you're not going to kill me if you throw your army at me. You can throw 2 CP at it and say, you're going to struggle a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. It now becomes like... What you probably see is the Custodes swing back to like more MSU builds. Lots of little squads where you can pop one of these and make a unit a pain to kill, rather than trying to make one big unit a nightmare to kill. It's still very potent in like the 27 Sagittarum build, where you can just make 2 units of Sagittar very difficult to kill on 2 different objectives, where your opponent has to overcommit a lot of resources, and they have to do it before you decide of using the stratagem. So if they don't, suddenly, fine, your 400 points of commitment kills my squad of Sagittarum. I've got 6 more than where they came from, and it becomes a very different dynamic. And I think that's fine. It just, the Solar Watch build wasn't the most engaging to play against, I don't think, which is part of why I think it's been excised a little bit. But I don't think Custodes deserved this much of a nerf. Like, it is a pretty painful...
You'll remember that one of the things that they said in the last Meta Watch was that they were looking at armies that might poke above their threshold with changing the top armies.
Right.
And I guess, like, looking at the numbers for Custodes, they weren't that far off that threshold, but they were also lower than other armies that went unaffected. So...
maybe they looked at it and saw that they were specifically losing to lists like Dark Angels, where they were just a worse version of that. So, I don't know. I don't think it's a bad change. I just think it's maybe a little unwarranted. I just don't know if Custodes need to this juncture. I'm happy to see it, though. I don't think that list was very fun to play against.
No, it wasn't.
Right. Next up, we have Guard, which is finally the changes we've all wanted to see. So, the first one, Kazakin, the Overlord, or Kazakin specifically, I suppose you could also use it on Scions if you're insane. The overcharged lifestyle stratagem now capped at 6 mortal wounds total. So there are a couple of jank things that we can do with this that I'll go into in a second. But this means that when you're split firing Kazakin, you no longer get 6 mortal wounds on every target. Some events were already FAQing this and continue to do so even after GW didn't change it in the FAQ for Guard, which we touched on in the last stat check extra. But the main thing here, there is still some cool stuff you can do with this. So when you're firing mortal wounds, do remember that mortal wounds always apply at the end of the attack. So for Kazakin, if you fire, you can still split between 2 units pretty comfortably. And if you fire and you kill the first one, the mortal wounds that you would have done to that unit don't apply because the unit's not there to apply the mortal wounds to, which means they would apply to the second unit. So you can still get a lot of reliability out of the stratagem where, if it only takes 2 mortal wounds to kill the first one, but you rolled the 6 6s, you're not going to waste 4 mortal wounds there. You'll still get them on the second squad. So there's still a few cool things you can do with this. It's still pretty useful. It's the same thing that Admech players were doing with Wrath of Mars for a while, where you can jank around the allocation a little bit. It's still pretty good if you're going to resolve the sniper first to try and get the flat 5 damage from the 2 mortal wounds on a 6, and then another one. I think Kazakin are still an incredibly powerful THG for 100 points. They just no longer become a delete 500 points button, which is purely healthy for the game.
No, yeah, I agree. It's exactly the change that we were looking for when they originally dropped the Guard FAQ. See our episode on that.
Lord Penn brings up, I really did both strats even with a solar break. I don't think it was quite as bad as you think. I don't know, man. I was playing Iron Hands. Everybody was using both stratagems against me and dying anyway.
I can tell you right now, as Ravenwing, when you would say, "All right, I'm hitting you on 2s, rerolling 1s, and winning you on 3s, rerolling 1s," they would immediately pop both strats.
No, you're not. Yeah.
So sure, into the bad armies, it maybe doesn't matter that much. But the best things in the game, it was essential. And I think without the access to it, they just Iron Hands will cleave through a squad of them without trouble, without both stratagems. And I think that's the real change here. Is some of the best armies just don't care. The second change we saw to Guard is the finial of the blah blah. is now an aura that only ignores rules that prevent ignoring wounds. So that's feel no pains, damage reductions, and phase caps are now ignored. This no longer ignores hit and ballistic skill modifiers, which is
Well, it never ignored ballistic skill modifiers. There's only hit.
no,
modifiers.
you're right. It just ignored hit modifiers. This now means that you actually take penalties on mortars and sentinels and things like that. It's a very good change. Very good.
Hence
change.
actually starts to matter again.
Yeah. I think this is still a very good relic. It still confers a reroll once to wound aura. It still ignores a bunch of very important rules. It just means that you don't get to just kill a bunch of stuff in the game with no defensive rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually didn't mind it. I think it would have been better if they changed it to like a targeted buff in the shooting phase on one unit for ignoring everything. That would have been cool too. But I get the theme. It's a banner. It should affect everything. I'm just glad that the Dark Angels one never affected everything within 6 like this did. So yeah, it's a good change. I think Guard are still completely fine from this. The Leman Russ power is completely unchanged. Rough Riders, Mortars are still very good. You maybe just like things like the 18 Sentinel build take a bit of a hit, like the very extreme edge cases of the Guard army, and they don't have that instant I win button in the Kazakin into some matchups where you Guard have to be a little more fair in how they play the game now, which I think is just all upside. I think.
Yeah, no, so. You covered everything.
Cool. Go through Dark Angels first, then Jeremy.
All right, Dark Angels. We lost Transhuman on Terminators. Simple as.
Not just Terminators, everything.
Sure, but Terminators is all that really mattered. You lost on Blade Guard Veteran, you lost on Azrael, you lost on the Interrogator Chaplain and the Ancients.
Yeah.
Those ones you didn't really care as much.
To be transhuman now.
He can. Same with the Blade Guard Veterans. You can also make them transhuman. Kills the 47 Terminator build. But the fact that Ravenwing went untouched through this is very funny.
Ravenwing didn't go untouched through this. You still very much suffer from the Codex Warfare changes.
Sure, Codex Warfare becomes a non-starter now, but like all game dev is still huge for Ravenwing.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's still, I think there's still good Ravenwing lists. I just don't think they're great anymore.
Yeah, no, like I'm still gonna run them, but that's because I've been running them since.
Yeah. I think they very much fall into like the 3rd or 4th best Marines faction.
Oh, probably, yeah. Losing the transhuman, it hurts, especially since they also they kept the malice on being able to fall back, and so the only thing that they get out of that is that they're immune to morale.
Debuff. It's not a debuff with morale immunity, which is exactly what you're looking for as a Marine player.
Yeah, it's like woo, great. But the Terminators are still dirt cheap. You still have access to the -1 damage banner. You still have access to a feel no pain. You're just now being wounded on 2s against strength 8 and above. It definitely hurts their durability a lot, but they needed to address this somehow. I was expecting mini transhuman or point changes, but seeming as how they did no point changes in this slate, this was their approach. Just sledgehammer it away.
Yep, and nothing of value was lost.
Let's put Cliff back in here.
Welcome back, Cliff. Cliff just had to go and be happy about the Dark Angels changes in the side for a little bit.
All right, Drukhari. Quite simply, paint engines have core again.
Do you want to not skip Deathwatch? Cliff's right there.
No, we're skipping Deathwatch.
Previously, due to the way the Deathwatch super doctrine was worded, they did not gain access to the updated changes for Space Marine Doctrine. So they just ended up with the worst option. Now they get to choose which doctrine they're in round to round, which is really cool. But adds to the flexibility, increases our ability to make Codex Warfare work, because there actually are a decent number of options through picking up
weapons,
different super doctrines or different chapter tactics from other factions, and diving people ahead in assault doctrine. You've got lieutenant rerolls on basically everything in your army. You can get full rerolls to hit with a bunch of Desolator Marines. So there's lots of options to score in lots of different doctrines. So again, cool, definitely adds to it. I wish they had thrown us a little bit of the choose a chapter tactic every round.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been cool.
You just wanted your army of renown all the time,
Yeah, just give us the one thing from the army of renown all the time.
I think Deathwatch will be fine.
Personally. Yeah, I think it's fine. I think the combination of these changes likely puts us in that hovering around 50% plus or minus 2 to 3%.
I reckon they might be as good as Iron Hands and Wolves now, to be fair.
Woo!
I don't know if it will be, but I think it could bear out. The amount of buffs you can stack on things like Desolation Marines in Deathwatch is insanity.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
one of the few Marine chapters that has to ignore cover with nowhere to hide. You have things like Tome of the Ectoclades and the
Full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound,
full
ignore
rolls
cover.
to hit, rolls to wound, ignore cover.
Yeah.
There's the Vorcam Pattern Auspicator for plus one techniques fly. I think there's a lot of very powerful abilities you can stack on like a Fairy Desolator Nest and Dark Angel in Deathwatch, and then support it with a bunch of fast scoring that might make this army ridiculous in the next couple of months. Which is, I'm definitely going to have an experiment with it. I think I'm going to play the next round of Vibe Check just to see what happens.
Yes.
But I think there's a very, very real potential for a Deathwatch build in here now, with the ability to be in Death Doctrine for the entire game, which was the one thing they were missing. Like, they had everything else. It was just that one thing. And then Call Order fits in quite nicely as a replacement for Codex Warfare for this army, where if your opponent's running like one or two of every data slate or fact data roll, you can just like desolate them off the board. You can't like just hide the last, the last fast attack, the last heavy support somewhere. Deathwatch are coming for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the typical approach. I mean, you'll do this as you iterate in this because you're like, a very good list builder / incredibly good player. But I don't think the previous iterations of like 300+ point blocks of Proteus squads is like.
Oh no! I'm running like 5s with frag cannons in a pod. That's all we're getting.
Yeah, and then random fast outrider squads with OBSEC and White Stars.
Yeah, exactly. You get a lot of flexibility from Deathwatch. I look forward to seeing what people can put together, and I'll be having to go at it myself because it seems super interesting. We're up to 80 people watching. This is terrifying. I don't like this. All right, let's move on to Drukhari.
All right, Anthony, and I'm going to answer right now Doug Tabor's question. Yes, Anthony is very aware of this. Core is back on Pain Engines, which unlocks quite a bit for them, actually. We were going through the list of what exactly it allows you to do with Pain Engines. So Homunculus extra toughness now applies. The Chronos wound rerolls from the Spirit Probe now apply. The Chronos resurrection ability now works on them. Prey on the Weak now works on them.
Before. The main one for Chronos is it now applies to themselves, where they couldn't bring their own models back. Now they have that back again, which means that there's a lot of threat in like trying to gum up a Dark Eldar army again.
To be fair, most like Thick City, for example, was usually only running single units of Chronos because Talos were where the real strength was. But I
definitely saw some people running like the full 18, which was its own nightmare. But
yeah, that's fair. And then I'm trying to think what else. Prey on the Weak is now available for them. There's a couple other like sub-faction specific stratagems that got unlocked, but they're not really of much note. Then the really big one is the Coteries, the Homunculi. All of the really good buffs in that Army of Renown were locked behind Core. Most notably, the 4-up Feel No Pain.
4-up Feel No Pain was not Core locked. That was the only one. You could use it on like Drazar and Harlequin units for a bit, if you remember. The main ones that Coteries locked behind is there's 2 Warlord traits that are really good. One is the reroll ones for Chronosuit for core units, which was previously using like the Rat Horde list. Now can apply to your Grotesques, or not your Grotesques, your Chronos and your Talos. And then the reroll shots one, you can reroll the number of shots on weapons with one of the other ones, which means that stuff like Chronos can get a lot of mileage out of rerolling, getting much higher damage output. There's also like a pre-game +1 strength to ranged attack stratagem, which is not too bad, and then a few other little ones in there. One thing I did want to quickly touch on, Chronos units is very big in Dark Necromancer still, which was still a list even as recently as like WTC last year, before it really got hostile for Dark Eldar. And those lists definitely did run like 3x3 Chronos, which now have a lot of inevitability, where if they get to you as well and you're only doing chip damage to them, they're suddenly popping up all over again and then just like laying into you again. So I think that list might also see some mileage again, which I think would be cool.
Yeah, just a heads up, Innes, you've gotten really choppy.
Oh, good.
StreamYard can't handle it.
I don't know what it is. I just wanted to mute Innes before we start talking about Tyranids. We'll wait for his connection to stabilize a little bit. But yeah, no, Drukhari, this is fun. Puts Pain Engines back on the menu for a lot of lists. I'm looking forward to seeing what Drukhari players do with it. I know Anthony's probably going to experiment at least a little bit in the last couple months of Ninth with it. Maybe in one of the rounds of Vibe Check, he'll give it a try. But yeah, no, I don't think it breaks anything because,
No.
well, the game is already pretty lethal. So
Yeah. It's very different than when we had Dixit. The Dixit universe is not really the same.
I'm gonna hope that worked. My connection is still not great, but I'm gonna just speak slower and hope for the best.
you are much more stable than you were a minute ago.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. Right. Tyranids. I don't think the Tyranid changes were super important, but there are some cool ones in here. The main one, we get adaptives back. Adaptives are actually adaptive again, which is fantastic. It's not even that good,
So fun.
but it's fun. It's cool. It's the thing that they sold the codex on, more or less. So you actually get the ability to start with your base one. So for Leviathan, that's reroll a hit roll. For Kraken, that's the D3+3 advance. For Behemoth, it's the reroll charges. And you can actually swap them out game per game, which gives Tyranids a lot of flexibility back. The main ones you'll be looking at for factions like Kronos and Jormungandr, you can swap into Territorial Instincts for the 5 model obsec on your monsters. For Kraken and Leviathan and such, you're going to be looking at things like +1 to charge, if you're playing into an army where you want to be hitting charges, or things like the ignore Overwatch into an army like Tau, or ignoring modifiers if you're playing on a board with lots of woods. It gives you a lot of flexibility back. It doesn't really increase the power level. It does increase the power floor of Tyranids, which is cool because the data sheets are still way really expensive now. But it's cool that now you can at least have a bit of flexibility so that you're not being as punished for the expensive data sheets, and you can adapt a little bit on the fly. The other change we saw when we were playing to the last meta, they made it so that your tyrants had to be the warlord, so you couldn't just stick it on a nerf rope, and then they also keyed your warlord being alive to your synaptic imperatives. Now that's gone, and you can have a nerf of warlord again, which is fine. It's nice. It doesn't matter that much now. Like, it's nice that you don't have to worry about your suicide tyrant just randomly dying and losing your imperatives, like happened to me many times over tournaments.
It does mean that you can now suicide your tyrant because you can no longer overrun him, regardless of whether you killed what you were fighting, and not worry about losing your imperatives. Or
it maybe brings back like the Suicide Reaper Flyrant, because that guy was really difficult to use now. But with the buff to Reaper now ignoring damage caps or damage reduction, which we never really got to use because it was difficult to justify spending that many points on a tyrant to throw away. Now that you can run like a nerf over your warlord, it's maybe a little more excusable. I still don't think this helps Tyranids be like a top tier army again, but if you're playing Tyranids, you can probably win a GT with them, which you
only needed to move them up a couple percentage points, and this might do that. Yeah, they were sitting at like 43, 44%, so to get into GW's ideal zone.
Yeah, exactly. You can also have 3 warlord traits. You can take the Swarmlord now, which I think you already could. You just have to take another Flyrant as your actual warlord, or another Tyrant as your actual warlord. But if you're just taking the Swarmlord, this is a good change overall. You can also do things now like having a non-warlord tyrant with your with a warlord trait, and then also like a parasite with a warlord trait and an earth with a warlord trait. So there's a lot of ways you can like shimmy things around in Tyranids now that gives you some cool options. I think these are fine. They don't address the fundamental flaws with the faction just being too expensive and not having good secondaries at all. They're unplayably garbage. I would like somebody to read Synaptic Insight and tell me what GW were thinking, because I've not been able to figure it out, and I've played so many games of Tyranids.
Look, you just misread it and score 15 every game because you killed 5 units.
If you cheat, you will win.
If you cheat twice, you will win. you're not only cheating on like the number of points you can score, but also how the secondary works. Remember when that secondary was even worse and had a rider where it didn't count just dedicated transports towards the tally?
Yeah.
Oh, Christ. Right.
All right.
Nids. Happy times. Tau. Broadsides have core back. Doesn't really matter. It's fine.
You're as again, people we talked before we went live. You're gonna have people that swap out 3 broadsides for a Riptide, and I'll be happy to see it.
Yeah, they probably should not do that.
Yeah, the reason broadsides lost core, to be specific for anybody who's unaware of the history, when broadsides originally lost core was when Montcast still gave +1 EP when shooting against the closest unit within a certain range, which meant that it was very, very powerful for pushing up their smart missile system damage. When they were getting aggressive at you, advancing at you, they punished you very heavily for running at them. Now that Monka still doesn't have that AP bonus, and also there's a lot less easy access to things like Shadow Sun rerolls in town now, where previously you could take Shadow Sun and Supreme Command Detachment and give out 4 rerolls to hit to any Tau core unit, including Farsight Enclaves ones. So Farsight Enclaves broadsides were a really good combo with that. Now that there's no Supreme Command Detachment and you're limited to Shadow Sun being one of your 2 commanders at most, there's a lot less benefit to doing that, which means the broadsides just don't have the same pull that they used to. There's also the indirect nerf now. The rail rifles are still great. They're still, 2-shot dark lances. They're very powerful weapons. It's just, is that really what Tau need? I think this is a completely fine change. It's the great example of a nerf that's worth walking back because the game's just moved past through nerfs to other things in Tau and through just general changes to the game. We've moved past the need for this nerf, just like we did with Iron Strider or Ballistari, which have made absolutely no impact anywhere since changing back, except in Australia. I think it's broadly completely fine. I think that's it for the list of changes.
Yep, that's everything that I have.
Yeah, so all told, not a huge amount of changes. We've definitely seen bigger balance data slates. So like the one with Armory Contempt, the one with the indirect nerf. Like there's no game-wide big changes here. Broadly,
I'm just going to open up the data slate to double check, but
broadly we're looking at more or less the meta is going to be a natural evolution. So the meta that we're moving into with the next part of ARC is going to be a natural evolution of what we're already playing. The game is not changing drastically. There have been some new armies introduced. Some of the top end's been taken down, but nothing is like fundamentally getting rewritten as an army because of this. We're not seeing Armor Content, which suddenly makes Sanguinary Guard insane, especially on like boards with craters and things like that, where they could suddenly be on 0 armor states. We're not seeing the disappearance of Leviathan Tyranids from the meta. Dark Angels is probably the closest thing that's going to open up a lot of space in the meta, where armies that were gatekept by not being able to kill 10 to 20 Deathwing Terminators a turn now have a lot of playability. What we're not seeing is a change to anything like Desolator Marines, so things like Iron Hands and Space Wolves are still going to be very powerful. I expect to see Iron Hands be the strongest army coming out of this.
Yeah,
my personal belief.
I'm actually going to highlight a few other small changes because there was also an Arcs of Omen FAQ that dropped. So I'm just going to stop sharing because we're not on that anymore. But they basically added 3 FAQs to that and 2 erratas. The first errata was inflexible command. They ruled it to make the exact same change that Nephilim had, which was on the battlefield instead of in your army. Which everyone was playing it like that. Anyone who ruled it otherwise was just hating guard players. And then Brood Swarm, the change to that was the second, third, and fourth was points now say wholly within instead of within.
Which is a good change.
On the line.
It's actually good both ways. Like, it makes Genestealer Cults a little less obnoxious with them standing on the line, but also enemies can't stand on the line against you. So
yeah, it works both ways.
It helps. It works both ways. It's honestly like it doesn't really matter that much.
Then there's the head scratcher. The first FAQ is that the character Dreadnought in Iron Hands occupies a regular elite slot.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's just more of this is the first time the GW has actually
bit.
said there's an order to list building as opposed to just checking if the list is legal.
Technically, there always was a small ordering thing with that, because you could never make that guy, if you made that character your warlord, he didn't get a trait because of the way the order happened with giving a warlord trait versus using stratagems, which is why you never saw the double up warlord traits on him, because otherwise you could do things like give him student of history so he could consolidate out of combat and also the exploding sixes, which would have been a really cool option, but the ordering doesn't work out like that. So there was already a pregame order with this guy, so it's fine bringing it in.
It just makes it clear so people don't have to rule on it one way or the other. It's just like, no, this is how GW said it, and that's how it's going to work. And really, it means you drop a unit of scouts, or you drop a unit of scouts, or make 2 5s into 110.
Honestly, I'm looking at just playing 6 elites instead of 6 heavies now that I don't need Codex Warfare as much, and just leaning into more of the mixed arm stuff, playing like 3 squads of Vanguard Veterans, 2 squads of scouts.
Makes perfect sense.
So we'll definitely see some changes to Iron Hands, but I expect them to still be very, very strong because they can still be in Devastator Doctrinal game, and Volkite Contemptor and Desolation Marines still equal bad times for most armies. Space Wolves have a lot of ability to push up the board still. Desolation Marines give them inevitability in late game. Demons saw absolutely no changes here, will still remain one of the top armies in the meta, whether that's with the Siege build, the Slanesh build, or the Big Boys build. We've seen all of those having great success across singles and team events across the globe. Custodes will still have builds. I expect Genestealer Cults to be completely fine. You'll run more Acolytes now to grab behind enemy lines, and you'll move away from Brood Swarm.
So there were 2 still FAQs to go through in the Arcs. Omen.
Go for it.
So the first one is, for the purposes of Codex Warfare, if a unit treats its active combat doctrine as being different from the currently active doctrine, does it score points if it is treating it as active for my army? So basically, they said yes. So specific wordings work one way as opposed to the other way.
Yeah, so like Wolfen get to score you some assault points even if they're in the other doctrine, which is fine. It means that secondary is a little more playable for a few armies. It's not a big deal.
With the nerf to Codex Warfare, it probably is not going to be taken very often, because even like scoring 5 in heavy and then 5 in assault, it's like, well, that's 10 points. You still need to score 5 in tactical, which is...
I would say Wolves is maybe the only one that would get away with it, because you can get things with the metal guns in that army, which is pretty reasonable. But even then, it's probably still only like a 12.
You still have to kill 13 units to score.
It's also just like moving into the tactical doctrine is just not ideal generally. So.
And then the last one is the weird one, but Tempestus Scions. Can you take more than 3 of them if you have some in a patrol? And the answer is yes. You can take 3 elites, and then you can take as many as troops in the patrol as you can, which is 3.
Kind of makes sense.
I don't think you were really taking, like, if you were taking Scions, you were taking them into patrol anyways because you wanted them to be troops, so you could do things like R&D with them without having to roll. And also that means that they were OBSEC. Elite Scions, I wasn't seeing a huge amount of them.
Better use.
We might actually see like an actual Scions build now, though, with some of the other changes, like Hazukin not being as great. I think we could definitely see.
Maybe.
You could see some. Like I know there have been people talking about like 40 Scion drop builds, which, because they do get a lot of free special weapons and things like that. We could definitely see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all told, that's the big changes from the Dataslate and the arcs. Any closing thoughts? Anything implication wise?
One quick thing is that the 2 things from the video and one from the actual FAQ. One from the video, there's a lot of language around like, we'll keep an eye on insert faction. World Leaders is one of them. Like, I'm not sure what their plan is after keeping an eye on them, given that by the summer we're going to be in 10th edition, and it doesn't look like there's any anticipated changes in the rules.
Yeah, they're going to nerf the 10th edition World Leaders Codex if 9th edition World Leaders is
Day 1 FAQ. Sorry, World Leaders.
Day 1 FAQ. Sorry, Anthony. Angon is mandatory.
And then the second thing is like the insistence on not addressing, and maybe they meant to do so indirectly through the Codex Warfare changes and the doctrine changes, but the insistence on not recognizing that sub-factions within the Codex Space Marines book are like real factions that require balance passes. I think like Iron Hands by way of player population is like the 10th most played faction. It's worth considering if you're Games Workshop and you randomly take a look at this video. Please, it is worth considering taking a look at individual sub-faction performance depending on their player population and their overall representation in the meta.
Look, man, Iron Hands are completely fine. Everybody needs to chill out. Leave me alone. I want to win another golden ticket.
Do it. Innes, do it with Deathwatch and then auction it to the rest of the Deathwatch.
I don't think I can. I don't think that's how golden tickets work, but it would be fine.
No, they're not transferable, unfortunately.
It's ridiculous. What a fun time. Anyway, guys, I think that is going to do it for us. Long live Iron Hands. We're all so glad Dark Angels are dead. That codex has been waiting to be oppressive since it dropped. It's been ridiculous in so many ways, and transhuman has always been a bad mechanic.
We do have a question from a super chat that we missed at the very beginning. Do you think GW accidentally created any new problems from this, thinking Thick City unnerfs or the Tau Core type changes?
No,
I don't think so. Like, neither of those armies...
We'll see a Talos build now. I think there will be a good playable Talos Kronos build. I don't think it's going to be anything near the top, anything they're broken.
Yeah, I think it'll be fine.
I can't wait to see what Anthony does with it, though. Anthony will definitely ruin somebody's day with that at least a few dozen times. It's actually the change we needed to keep Anthony invested in 40k for the next couple of months. That's all they were like.
Yeah, his World Leaders were doing fine. He was having fun with them.
I'm not convinced he was. Have you heard him speak about how he plays World Leaders? He just sits there and Art of Wars it in the corner.
Art of Wars?
He admits it. It's true. He's become an Art of War boy.
Oh, boy.
All right, guys. Thank you so much to all of everybody who stuck with us for this one. It's been a pleasure. We'll be back with more coverage tonight for XM1.
Yes.
In like 8 hours?
9.5 hours-ish?
8.5. Yeah, 8.5.
8.5.
Cool.
Right.
8.5 hours. XM1 will be here live on the channel with Tim and Cliff. Do you guys have a guest this week?
No guest this week. Just us talking through fundamentals of play, potential implications of changes in Deathwatch, and how I might make adjustments to my list, which I think are going to head in the same direction I was headed anyway, away from these giant Proteus blocks, which are bad. I think. And yeah, That's it.
Martin asks a very quick super chat question before we finish up, and I do the plugs. What does the
Yeah.
60 Elites Iron Hands look like in this? Okay, so you cut all the heavy supports that aren't a 10 of Desolation Marines and 2 squads of Devastators, and you add in more Van Vets and Scouts. That's it. It's not very complicated.
Storm Speeders?
No, we're definitely not running Storm Speeders. Jesus Christ. Right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us. This has been Stat Check. If you enjoyed what we do here, you can check out the live show every Tuesday at 11 p.m. GMT and various other times across the globe. We also have a Discord where you can get access to all of us ranting about the Dataslate a couple of hours in advance of what happened today. It was a super cool 12:48 p.m. today, as I realized, oh no, I have to read 200 things now, and I have a coaching call in 10 minutes. Great. So yeah, for $5 a month, you can get access to that. We would love to hear you. We would love to have you there. If you want to get all the best access to 40K, new agents of the Imperium stock, nobody cares. It's just Arbites. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
No,
Wait, I care.
we'll talk about it inside the in the Discord if you want to come check us out.
Yeah, if you want to hear about our thoughts on Arbites, come to the Discord where we'll be ignoring them like GW should. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us. We'd love you to check out the main show. If this is the first time interacting with us, go and check out the website, check out the CRS, check out the Yellow, check out the metadata dashboard. There's a bunch of cool stuff, but I also just really need to go and paint my army for Alpine. So thank you so much, everybody, for being with us, and we will catch you later.
Peace, y'all.